Yeah, it's so fun to be here again. Yeah, so I know a lot of you in the room already are familiar with me because it's not like I was not here that long ago. But basically, my specialty was I worked with Martin, and my specialty was geochemistry, volcanology, igneous petrology, specifically the rhyolites of Eastern Oregon. And I was hired at DOGAMI. I'm now the lead field geologist there, and I was hired to basically help with all their mapping of the Harney Basin. And so I already had a lot of background in the area and experience doing field work and talking with people and out there and seeing what they need and things like that. So when Dogami told me that they needed some efforts to some outreach projects and basically some people to just promote what Dogami is doing, but also help communities understand what we're doing. I was really excited to take on this project. So yeah, I'm hoping there's extra time at the end so we can talk a lot about some of your ideas that you have with all of this work. Okay. So Eastern Oregon, there's a lot going on in Eastern Oregon, and it's more than just like a really beautiful dry landscape. Um, it's got a lot of different hazards that we know about. So obviously, it's susceptible to earthquakes. There's some volcanism that happens, like Jordan craters and diamond craters out there. They have to worry about floods and landslides and things like that. And of course, water scarcity, we know that. And then in terms of natural resources, we know that there's been a lot of conversations recently about things like lithium mining and other resources like that, like other critical minerals. And we know that the community really thrives on agriculture. So it's an interesting dynamic that's going on out there because it is so dry in some of those areas, but they really rely on water. So water is another resource that is important. And so there's a lot of motivation for kind of like what you could possibly talk about with the people in Eastern Oregon. Like there's so much to talk about and so much to protect and educate people about. So part of the motivation with this work was um, a lot of people in this room are either geologists or adjacent to a geology major, something like that. Um, we might understand how what I just talked about with resources and natural hazards, how that really relates to geologic mapping, but not everybody knows that. And so it's interesting because it starts to get you thinking about like, well, in order for people to understand like why we're doing what we're doing, it's important to kind of educate people on the relationship between geologic mapping and natural resource management and geologic hazard mitigation. And so, an example of that kind of relationship is water scarcity is a concern for Eastern Oregon communities that rely on groundwater, but do members of the community know the role that geologic mapping plays in addressing that issue? So that's just one example of kind of like the questions that we were thinking about. And so the way these kinds of projects work is that FEMA is always really interested in any kind of outreach that's related to natural hazards, and anytime the community will reach out to whether it's policymakers or the public or whoever it is, and they reach out to members of Dogami and say, this is what we're dealing with, this is our problem or a concern or a question. Um, we can work with partner agencies like FEMA to basically put together a project and say like, okay, how are we going to tackle this? And because FEMA focuses on natural hazards and natural hazard outreach and mitigation, they provided the funding to do this outreach work. So the goals for this project were basically to educate public stakeholders and policymakers about natural resources and geologic hazards of Eastern Oregon, and then also the role of DOGAMI and geologic mapping in addressing their issues, needs, and concerns. Um, And in addition to that, it was really important that we make sure we build long-lasting positive relationships with all of those folks that I just mentioned. So, we already have a lot of relationships with local folks, county level, federal level, tribes and things like that. And we just want to like continue those relationships and make it so people, when they think of Dogami, they think of like, it's a good rapport and people that are here to help. And continue reaching out to us when they have questions or concerns. And so the overall materials that we wanted to make with this were a trifold brochure, and I'm gonna go into these in detail if you're wondering what these are. So a trifold brochure, one of the Dogami fact sheets that you might have heard of because they're listed. A whole bunch of different fact sheets are listed on Dogami's website, and then an interactive experience builder website. So these top two, the brochure and the fact sheet, actually, I have printed a few of them near the sign-in sheet over there. So if you'd like to grab one, you can. And if for some reason we run out, for some reason we run out, it's obviously available online. And I'm going to be talking about these in detail too. And the goal would be to share these during formal and informal interactions. So what I mean by that is like formal events like workshops and conferences and things like that, town halls and stuff like that, or informal interactions like when we're out there doing field work and we have to talk to people, different landowners about what we're doing on, can we access your property and here's why we're doing that and all of that. There's really good opportunities to hand out these outreach materials. Um, and then participate in any outreach events in interested communities. So basically, this kind of goes along with the formal thing, but it could be anything, whether it's, just having like a booth somewhere or anybody that's interested in just like, hey, who are you folks in your bright vests and your hammers on the side of the road? So all different angles that we're trying to be able to have these discussions and conversations with all different kinds of people is kind of the goal. Okay, so first I'll go into the brochures. Obviously, you're not expected to read any of this. I'm going to go into all the different parts in detail in a second. But it's basically these trifold brochures, and the goal for this one would be for it to be brief. It's only two sides of one page, eye-catching and introductory. So trying to minimize jargon, just basically giving people a just sort of a like brief 101, get them interested so that if they want to learn more, they can through other materials. And we would be trying to distribute these at maybe parks, town hall meetings, or just handed directly to landowners when we approach them when we're working. Okay, so I'm going to walk through I'm going to go through the trifold brochure in the most detail because the fact sheet basically just expands on the same stuff, just in more, it just elaborates. It's like more detail. So it's got the same like content basically, but just expanded. And same with the Experience Builder site. So we start with presenting questions that the community may be thinking about. We're trying to relate to them and say, these might be some things that you think about in, in your community or just day to day, if you're a landowner or something like that. Are there any mineral resources where I live? Is my house built in an area susceptible to landslides? What rocks in my area may host groundwater? Or could earthquakes possibly occur in my area in the future? And then this next part is really important because DOGAMI and the Oregon Water Resources Department have different roles, and we want to make sure it's clear to the community. We don't want to, first of all, we don't want to step on any toes at OWRD, but also we don't want to send mixed messages to the community and create confusion. So we basically say, if you have questions about hazards like landslides or earthquakes or resources like minerals, you could talk to DOGAMI or the USGS. But if you're concerned about groundwater rights and resources, then you would talk to OWRD. So one way that Jason McLaury puts it is we geologists define the bathtub, and OWRD says what you can and can't do with the water. So, and then this, you saw this already. This is basically bringing the connection of like, hey, all these things that you might have thought about before, did you know that they're actually, a lot of them are geologic hazards? So trying to bring the, the viewer to think like, oh, those are related to geology. Like I didn't think about that. And then And then in this section, we just say, we kind of make the full circle, like in order to address any of those concerns that you have that might have been mentioned over there, or if you're thinking about those hazards, the in order for someone like a policymaker to make informed decisions or a landowner to make informed decisions in order to protect the public, we must understand the regional geology. And then this section is just basically saying how I talked about how DOGAMI works with partner agencies, and in this case, FEMA helped fund the outreach work here. And then this is just a section that says it's basically what does a mapping geologist do, and it starts with just like a super brief way of saying, this is kind of like what you might see or what you're familiar with in satellite view. And then this is what what it would look like as a geologic map. This is part of Moon Reservoir in the Harney Basin. And obviously, as most of you know, like this is, you could elaborate, you could make like a 5-page thing on just what I have here. But the purpose is so that someone would look at this and say like, okay, I think I get it, but I think I want to know more. That's kind of what we're going for. Trying to make sure that it has something relatable in the satellite view so people can see like, oh, that's, each rock type is assigned a different color and stuff like that. Okay, so then the backside of it starts going into how do they do it. So we talk about field work and just really brief mentioning of, you make observations at the outcrop scale and hand sample scale, or you're collecting rocks for analyses. And then laboratory work and analysis. So, like what we're actually doing with those samples and trying to give people an idea. I like this section a lot because this is probably something that someone in the public has seen before. So, like, some people in an ideal world, they would be wearing a safety vest because they're on the side of the road. But there's like a lot of really cool stuff that we do. And I think those are the fun pictures. It's like, look at all this cool stuff that we're doing. And then we go into, this is the putting it all together. So it's like, how does all of this stuff become a geologic map? Like, how does this go into the making of a map? We walk everybody through, like, there's different rock types, you're making contacts, and then, you're like assigning rocks and to different types. You make a cross section so that it informs you about what's going on in the ground. And that concept of how does knowing what these rocks are on the surface, like how could there be really something different like way below? If you just saw a little rock outcrop like that, to someone who's not a geologist, they may be thinking like, is there really anything more than underneath, like than just that rock or just some more dirt? But that's why you say something relatable. Like imagine the earth is a slice of cake, right? The earth is a cake, and so the slice is what it would look like with the layers. So trying to kind of show this idea of, like what you're seeing on the top might be a little bit different, but we're trying to figure out what's on top so it can inform us about what's going on underneath. And you'll see throughout the all the different products, the cake comes up repeatedly. So then the next section is why did geologists do it? And this is where we get to talk about some of the success stories. And because the brochure is so brief and there's just not a lot of space, I was only able to put one example, but the fact sheet includes two examples and the experience builder includes three. And so this is one of the most important parts is because it's basically saying like what's an example of what all of this does like to the community? Like how does all of this like what's an example of all of this doing what we want it to do? And this particular example is when DOGAMI helped map some areas of Prineville, and they were concerned about why new wells that they were drilling were coming up dry. And basically, long story short, and you can look at the experience builder if you want to learn more details about it, but it's basically there were channelized lava flows, and so it was dictating where the water was going, but on the surface, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So they were figuring out that the water was residing in different areas, and the geology helped them figure out where it was residing. So um, then they were able to drill where they needed to drill. So there's a few different stories related to groundwater and earthquakes and things like that that we can share. And then this just says basically it's a really brief mention of mapping priorities and kind of how they are assigned, like how do we figure out where we're going to map and why. And it mentions DOGAMI's mission, which is to provide earth science information and regulation to make Oregon safe and prosperous. And then it has the contact information. And so this way, if someone's looking at this and they're saying like, wow, I like this and I want to learn more, um, the QR code would bring someone to the DOGAMI webpage, and it has a PDF of this and the fact sheet and the link to the experience builder. And then this is also just like a little plug um, for HasView too. So if we had more room, we would include a lot more because DOGAMI has a lot of really cool products like HasView and tools that you can use. But this is just kind of like what we could fit reasonably. But that is in fact the real QR code, and I'm going to show it again later if you want to scan it even bigger than this. Okay, so then the next one is the fact sheet. I'm not going to go into it, like I said, in super detail because it's really just expanding on the same thing. You can see all the sections look kind of similar. And more cake. Um, and so this one has an example of identifying earthquake-prone areas in the Walla Walla Basin. Um, and you know about this because you were there with me. Yeah, so this is meant to be more detailed and informative. And same idea, like you could pass this out in town halls or outreach events and hand directly to landowners or policymakers. The main difference with the fact sheet, though, is this is technically like a 4-page document, and the last page has all of it has the map that shows past, current, and future mapping priorities that DOGAMI's like under DOGAMI's umbrella. So this map is really great because it shows all those areas, and this is kind of just like a zoom in of the key in terms of, state map focus areas, Earth MRI, which is like a critical minerals projects. Um, it goes back pretty far and it has different scales and stuff. And it elaborates a little bit more on how those mapping priorities are cited. And then yeah, so the experience builder. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Esri Experience Builder sites, but basically you interact with them by scrolling through it. So I recorded basically a video of me just what it would look like if you just continued scrolling, so you can see what happens. Um, so I might pause this if it's going kind of fast, but um, actually I'll look this up already pausing. Um, this is a little screen that comes up. It's a little splash screen that just says it's intended to be viewed on a monitor. It's going to look kind of goofy if you did it on a phone or a tablet. There's ways that you can change experience builders to be on different size screens, but because there's just so much like large viewing content, it's really just so if you could scan the QR code and try to pull this up on your phone, but I'm just giving you a warning, it's going to look kind of wonky. Um, but yeah, so it's walking through and it shows like all the sections at the top if you want to navigate through, like just jump to a spot. Um, this is that introduction section that has those questions that I showed you before. And this is me just like continuing to scroll. Um, and then it talks about how that connection between like how the community can bring up an issue or a concern and to DOGAMI and we work to figure it out. And then this elaborates on all the different geologic hazards of Eastern Oregon. So you can go through these tabs and click and read about them, and kind of like how they specifically affect Eastern Oregon. Um, Talking again about the connection with geology and answering these concerns. And then this area where it's under what mapping geologists do, we get to add a section about preliminary research. So before you do all the field work and that stuff, you get to look at like what's been done before, right? So older maps and you get to see, you have access to all of these different things like, uh, DOGAMI resources to see what's been mapped before. Um, and then this is working through what more details about, what's going on when you're doing field work, when you're looking at hand samples and you're collecting, digging trenches, and then lab work. Um, Anybody who's done geochem knows exactly what that is. And then, um, yeah, so this gets to break down the constructing of the map and those block diagrams in more detail. So we get to explain to people more about like this is what you see, and this is kind of like how we turn those into rock types and making the cross section, and then how well data can help us with that. And then this section is breaks down what the components are of a final. Let me pause it because it's going kind of fast. This goes through the components of a final DOGAMI map publication. So if someone in the community or a policymaker or something like that was like, I understand that I want, I understand that my problem relates to understanding the geology. Here I am on your website. I see the map. What am I looking at? Like, what does this even mean? This breaks down for them uh, what each one of these components of the map are. So they're allowed to click on the PDF. If you basically want this full PDF, you can just click there. And then it just walks them through like what the inset maps mean. And then like what the list of map units are, the explanation of map units. And then this is an interesting section because basically what it's doing is it's circling back to those original posed questions from the beginning and saying like, this is how geology actually relates to those questions. And then this is the success stories I was talking about with, you heard about the crime bill one already. And then there's the earthquake hazard mitigation in Walla Walla and just volcanic research in the Harney Basin. And it elaborates more on those connections and how geologic mapping has helped with these hazards. And there's links at the bottom of some of them, like if you want to actually learn more about those particular things. And then this has the past, present, and future mapping. So this is what you saw before on that tab. And then this one is a new feature that DOGAMI just put together where you can actually, it's all of that information on that plain image, but now you can actually zoom in and click. So you can like find those maps in that area, which is really cool. And then there's contacts and additional resources. And then just some more of like DOGAMI's different tools like HasView and Slido, in case people want to play with those. And lots of different cool things there. So yeah, this experience builder site is really interesting. And I think so I gave this talk on all of these different products at this this other meeting about, for DOGAMI and state map and all of that. And what's really interesting is it's immediately starts to bring up the possibilities because with an experience builder, you have so much room. It's like infinite space. You can just keep adding to it. And, with the contract with FEMA was like, natural resources and critical minerals and outreach related to that. But now it's interesting because there's just more that we can keep adding to it. Like if you're trying to think about who would be using this, like where in what context would someone use this? And there's so many different things. Like we could do the landowners, policymakers, and stakeholders just like everything else, but I think this would be, as someone who has like a big teaching background, I feel like this is really big for schools. Like I envision someone, like if I was a professor with a class and making some sort of like, or even a high school teacher making like a lab that's based on just exploring this, kind of like an assignment that has people just look through it and this way people can actually learn like what do we do at Dogami as mappers? Like what is our job and what is the purpose of mapping? Um, especially at a professional level. And at the meeting where I gave this last presentation, John brought up a really good idea, which was adding, information for schools to to be able to, if you're a student who's looking at this, you could say, yeah, that does look interesting. That does look like a career I'd like to be in. What are some programs in Oregon, at universities that I could look into, and how would I look into that? So that's one thing that's really interesting and worth adding to this. Now that we have basically infinite room. Um, so, like I said, all of those are available on Dogami's website. It's in the publication center. So if you just go to Dogami's website and hit publications, it's actually like one of the first three that comes up. And this is the QR code that would bring you there. And you'll see these come up as part of that whole like bundle. So these are the PDFs, and this is the Experience Builder site. So in terms of what's next, we want to keep adding more. Like I said, the idea of adding kind of different programs for teaching and so I might be like reaching too much, but like I think if there was like a educators sort of corner, like assignments, ideas for assignments that you could make out of this or something like that, that would be really cool. Or like I said, the like where could I get a degree in geology that would allow me to get into this career? That would be really cool. Um, and we're working on, so like I said, these are printed over there, if you want to take one. But we're trying to think of like where would be the best places to distribute some of these. And um, if we printed them on like really nice paper, I think the BLM offices and some post offices or public libraries, like think about when you're going to a national park, you might want to grab like a brochure like that. It could be kind of cool to grab one of these. And then we would still plan on doing, having these distributed at any OWRD or FEMA hosted events and conferences and stuff that we're invited to collaborate with them. So the goal for this, because I had so much fun doing this, and I think it's easy to see how other places would benefit from having this kind of thing. Like the reason we did Eastern Oregon was because FEMA wanted us to focus on that, and it was just really easy for us. We had plenty of motivation to do that. But from a geologist perspective, it's like, well, we could do one for like the Blue Mountains, and we could do one for Southeast, and we could do one for the Cascades. Like there's so many different regions. But in terms of like where it seems reasonable that we would get funding for it, possibly the Central Willamette Valley, because that's a state mapping priority that's coming up in the future, and like different like agricultural things that are going on in the Willamette Valley. Lots of folks in like the AVAs, like the wine industry, and just an example of someone who really wants more detailed, high precision geologic maps in their area. But yeah, I feel like this would be fun to do in any area. And then with any extra time that we have, I would love to get some ideas from you. In terms of the brochures and fact sheets, like there's not a ton of space to add more things, but and those are considered final publications for the Eastern Oregon ones. But for future ones, if you can think of anything critical or important to add, especially experience builders, because there's just so much room. So if you have any ideas, I would love to hear them. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this with you. So thank you.